Welcome back, Sebastian here. So power rankings time for the Monaco Grand Prix. So I'll start right away. So in 20th place, I have Nick de Vries. So a bit of a better weekend for de Vries, but a pretty challenging weekend overall, I thought. Was still qualified by his teammate, Sonoda, and in the race was one of the slowest drivers on track and was causing like a very long train to appear behind him. But that being said, he didn't crash, especially when things got really treacherous towards like the 2/3 of the race distance mark. So overall, not a terrible weekend, but I think not a great weekend either. Number 19, I have Logan Sargent. So for Sargent, very similar, I think, to de Vries. He was out-qualified by his teammate. He was quite slow in the race and was one of the few drivers who was actually overtaken on track during the race. But that being said, it's his first Monaco Grand Prix, and he did keep it out of the barriers when things got rough. Now, number 18, moving down 2 positions, is Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, I think I can kind of forgive what happened in qualifying, given that it seems that he did have damage to his car. And we know that with these new cars, damage to that area of the car can cause a massive loss of time. Think about what happened to Verstappen in Silverstone last year. So for Stroll, though, I think, his race was not great. I think he went for several moves that were very extremely over-ambitious. Especially the one on the first lap, which caused him to lose a bunch of positions, going for a gap at the hairpin that wasn't really there. He then tried to pass Magnussen at Rascasse when the move wasn't really on either. And of course, when things got wet, he went and crashed into the wall several times, which eventually ended his race. So overall, not a fantastic weekend, pretty poor weekend for Stroll, and he's going to be wanting to put this one behind him, especially since that's 2 pointless weekends in an Aston Martin in a row. Number 17 is Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, a bit of a rough weekend, I think. He was just out-qualified by his teammate, and in the race, it was not great, I thought. He was given that penalty on the opening lap for that extremely ambitious and aggressive move on Sargent, where he basically just shoved him off to the side. And then, of course, he was later given a 5-second penalty for not. A 10-second penalty for not serving the penalty problem properly, but that's more on the team than on him. Number 16, moving down 2 positions, is Zhou Guanyu. Tough weekend, I thought, not great. He was quite anonymous all weekend, so it's really hard to give comment on him. Although he did make that one mistake at the turn 1 at Saint Debat when he basically took the Gunathan line and basically missed turn 1, and then he had to concede a position to Hülkenberg. But that being said, not much to say on him other than he had a not great race. And I think Bottas has started to get the better of him again these last couple races. Now, speaking of Bottas, the number 15 is Valtteri Bottas, who's moved up 3 positions from last race. So for Bottas, I think he's been quite a bit better the last couple races. He had that kind of moment kind of in the middle of the season where he looked quite poor. But I think both in qualifying and the race, he's looked better. And I think he benefited from going onto the inters really early, where Stroll kind of went and crashed into the barriers. Bottas was able to gain quite a few positions. So for Bottas, pretty good weekend overall, I think, especially given that the Alfa Romeo car is not particularly good. Number 14, moving down 1 position, is Carlos Sainz. So for Sainz, a bit of a scrappy weekend. He had that moment where he basically went way too deep on the brakes into the Nouvelle chicane and almost wrecked his race when he damaged his front wing. I think he was extremely fortunate that the piece broke off very quickly and he was not given the meatball flag. Otherwise, that would have been almost certainly no points for Sainz. And again, of course, he made that other mistake going down the escape road, which lost him quite a few positions. It basically dropped him, I think, from a net 4th place all the way down to 8th. So not great for Sainz. Number 13, moving down 2 positions, was Kevin Magnussen. So another driver who was effectively in the wars all day. Qualifying, I thought, was good. It qualified his teammate, but in the race had quite a few moments. I think, to be fair, most of them weren't his fault. I think he was just kind of driving normally, and other drivers were just being very ambitious to try to get a move on him. Especially the one on Perez and on Stroll. Of course, he did kind of have a couple moments when things got wet, but honestly, the team has left him out so long on the hard tires. I thought it was an absolutely crazy call. So I honestly don't really blame him for having a couple moments there at that point. Of course, he then went off later and turned one on the wet tires, but of course, he managed to keep it out of the barriers, went down the escape road, and continued on his way. So number 12, moving up 3 positions, was Alex Albon. So for Albon, a bit of a tough weekend, but nonetheless, I have him moving up. He managed to keep it clean, kept it out of the wall, and did out-qualify his teammate. I know the Williams were really struggling with tire management, so the fact that he managed to not finish basically plumb last with his teammate was a bit of an achievement, I thought. Number 11, Pierre Gasly moves up 1 spot. Gasly, I think, had a good race. I think he's obviously going to be a bit overshadowed by his teammate Ocon getting a podium, and I think rightfully so. But that being said, he still had a decent qualifying, I thought. The race was pretty good as well. He was holding on with the cars around him, and he was basically going to be ahead of Russell before everything kind of went to absolute chaos with the rain. So for Gasly, I thought it was a decent weekend, but not super special, I thought. Now, number 10, the biggest mover, either up or down on my power rankings, is Sergio Perez, who dropped 7 positions from last race. So for Perez, I think while it is a bit, a bit aggressive to move him down that many positions, I don't think it's an overreaction. I think the fact that he made a big mistake in qualifying, actually several big mistakes in the race, I think was just an overall horror show of a weekend for Perez. I think, I understand, wanting to push in qualifying and pushing the limit, but in a Red Bull in Q1, there's no need to push to the absolute limit, especially in given that the car is so much better. If that was Q3, it would be a bit more understandable, but the reality is that if he had done that mistake in Q3, he would have at least probably started 10th, and he would still have a chance to get points. But doing that mistake in Q1 was much more costly, especially at a track like Monaco, where we know qualifying is everything. The race, I think, the strategy that they went on at the start was a pretty good call. Going from the hards and then starting on mediums, going to hards, lap 2, I thought was a pretty good call. But that being said, I think he had several moments where he was just having kind of a brain fade. The moment with Magnussen where he basically just kind of drove into the back of him and really severely damaged his front wing and had to get that replaced was definitely one of them. Another one was when he basically kind of hit the barrier. I think, he hit the barrier several times today as well. But overall, it wasn't a very good weekend for Perez. And, he was lapped by his teammate twice. So that really speaks volumes as well. Number 9 is Oscar Piastri, who moves up 1 position. So for Piastri, I thought a really solid weekend overall, gets points in the McLaren. I know he was out-qualified and beaten by Norris, but, Norris is a very high bar. So being close to him and being closer than Ricciardo was, I think, is, for now, satisfactory for Piastri. And, he did make that good move on Tsunoda as well when Tsunoda was struggling with his brake problems. Number 8, staying in the same position as last race, is Charles Leclerc. So for Leclerc, a bit of a tough weekend, I think, of all his Monaco Grand Prix weekends. So I think this is probably the least bad, which is a very low bar to clear. But for Leclerc, he qualified really well, got that grid penalty because of basically impeding. But honestly, I think based on everything I've seen, that grid penalty was mostly caused by a lack of communication with his engineer. So it was less on him and more on the team side and not communicating with him. But for Leclerc, I think he kind of just ran his own race, didn't really look to be challenging anyone. He looked like he might have had a chance of overcutting Hamilton, but that didn't come to any avail. The good news for him is that he managed to keep it dry, keep it out of the barriers when things got wet, and did end up beating his teammate, who started quite a few places. I think, 2 places ahead of him. Number 7, moving down 1 position, is Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, really solid race overall, but still moves down a position. Really good qualifying, I think, was quite unfortunate to have what looked like a braking issue. I don't know if that was what the exact issue was, if the brake was just like getting longer and longer and longer, or if it was some kind of mechanical issue as well, it looked like. But that being said, I think he didn't really have much of a chance in the wet holding on to his position, and I think he did the best he could. So that being said, still Yuki Tsunoda drops down 1 position. Number 6, dropping 2 positions, is George Russell. So for Russell, a bit of a tough weekend. Out-qualified by his teammate Lewis Hamilton, of course, and in the race looked like he had a good chance of getting a podium with a very opportunistic pit stop going to inters. However, he then made that mistake going down the escape road, which lost him a bunch of positions, and he was also given a 5-second penalty for colliding with Perez, although he's quite lucky that neither of them ended up with damage in that situation. Number 5, probably the biggest winner of the, probably the biggest surprise to me as well, is Esteban Ocon moving up 4 positions. You know, qualifying 4th and then being promoted to 3rd was, I think, fantastic for an Alpine. And in the race, I think, you know, he didn't put a single foot wrong, and he basically kept it clean, especially when others were going off left, right, and center. And he gets a first podium in, I think, two years, basically. So a really fantastic result for Ocon. And I'm really curious to see what the pace of the Alpines like next week at Barcelona, which is a much more representative circuit. Because this was a circuit, I think not many people had the Alpine being this good. Like basically on pace, mixing it up with both the Mercedes, maybe not Alonso's Aston, but both the Mercedes and the Ferraris. So I'm curious to see how they do next week. Number 4, moving up 3 positions, is Lando Norris. So he had a bit of a tough start to the season, I thought. But then recently, I think Norris has come on really strongly. He's been picking up pieces, especially when they fall his way, and he's been making very few mistakes. So I think I've been really impressed with Norris last couple of weeks in doing really good work, I think, in a pretty poor McLaren this year. Number 3, moving up 2 positions, is Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, really solid race overall. Out-qualified his teammate, beat his teammate, and kept it very clean. Looked like he was putting pressure on Ocon in the early going when it got wet. I think on a more traditional circuit, I think he would have had a very good chance of getting a podium as well. So all in all, I think a really solid step forward. I think a bit better than expecting from the Mercedes, given that this wasn't really a track that I think many people had high expectations for them. Number 2, dropping down 1 position, is Fernando Alonso. So of course for Fernando, I think not perfect weekend, but I think very close to the best weekend you could have hoped for. Qualified 2nd, I think qualifying was absolutely crazy. It was exceptional. I think he could have had a chance for pole if he went for his his last lap in Q3 a bit later. But that being said, the race, I think he never really had the pace of Verstappen to really challenge for the race win. And even with the whole pit stop drama, having to do 2 stops almost in consecutive laps, I think looking at the data, I think people have said that he never really had a chance of beating Verstappen even if he had done that 1 stop 2 inters. I think the gap would have been much closer, and we might have had a bit more on-track action, but I don't think it was ever really on the cards. And moving up 1 position, of course, is Max Verstappen, who I think had an absolutely phenomenal race. Pole win, led every lap. Didn't get the Grand Chelem for fastest lap. That, of course, went to Lewis Hamilton. But, you know, still basically almost flawless weekend. He had a couple moments where he touched the barriers, but honestly, I'm not really holding that against him. Everyone was going against the barriers in Sector 2 before they switched to intermediates. But that being said, you know, he controlled the pace. And in the wet, he was the fastest driver on track as well. So overall, just a fantastic weekend for him, and he pulls a massive gap over his championship rival. I'm going to say in quotations, because, I mean, even though Perez is 2nd in the championship, I don't really think it's much of a championship fight. But that being said, he does pull a massive point gap to Perez, and he'll keep looking to build that next weekend. So that's all for my Monaco Grand Prix power rankings. I think it was a pretty good race for Monaco, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next weekend at a more traditional circuit in Barcelona. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.